Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to Innovation Bay's Wednesday morning event series. I am your host, Ian Gardner. I'm the co-founder at Innovation Bay. I'm also a VC. I'm an investment partner with Gelix Ventures. So, also in the Innovation Bay team, which I want to say hi and thank you to, is Faden Stow, my co-founder, Shan Priest, our general manager, and Claire Tester, who's our event manager. So, yeah, welcome along. We've been doing this for a little while, if you haven't noticed. So we've tried a couple of new things. This was one that worked pretty well. So we're trying to replicate the sort of coffee queue meetup capability, i.e. you meet someone random and they become a customer, a employee, a supplier, investor, whatever. So yeah, we're using Discord. So if you're interested in this, there is a link there. And I think Shan's going to paste it into the chat as well. So check that out. Join us at 9 a.m. and have a chat with some good people in the ecosystem. For those that are familiar with Innovation Bay, welcome back. If you're not familiar with us, we think, well, we're pretty sure we're the longest running community group for founders and investors across Australia. Been going since about 2003. Our mission is to support founders on their journey from idea to IPO and beyond. And we do this using a range of events, programs, and any other content. Essentially, it's all designed to enable you and any other founders to connect, learn, and grow with each other. We couldn't do any of this without the support of our sponsors, so I really do want to have a big thank you and call out to them. So AWS, IAG Farmark Ventures, KPMG High Growth Ventures, and Macquarie Bank. So they really support the ecosystem and us, and it is fantastic to have that support. So it's 10 weeks exactly to the day since we started doing these events. We had this panel 10 weeks ago. The feedback was awesome. We had huge numbers and great feedback, so we thought we'd repeat it and bring them all back for round two. It is interactive, so in terms of the way this will run, it's as usual. So there is Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen and chat, so you can chat, just be nice. If you want to ask a question, just pop it in the Q&A and we'll try and get to them. So 10 weeks ago, I think a few of us re-watched that episode. There was a sort of mix of terror, confusion, where it was definitely a lot of pessimism around. So I guess we want to find out how we've gone and then look at a little bit more to the future. So let me stop my slide share and get to the panel. What a good looking panel there. So let me just do a quick welcome. So Michelle Deaker, she's the managing partner at OneVentures. OneVentures invests in companies with innovative products tackling multi-billion-dollar world problems. So welcome, Michelle. Craig Blair is co-founder and managing partner at AirTree Ventures. AirTree invests in ambitious founders who are looking to transform industries with software. Welcome back, Craig. Paul Bassat, co-founder of SquarePeg Capital. SquarePeg's on a mission to enable extraordinary founders as they invest across Australia, Israel, Southeast Asia, and the US. So kind of a global focus there. So welcome, Paul. And Rick Baker, co-founder, Blackbird Ventures. Blackbird invests in every type of technology from software to space, unified by founders with the biggest of ambitions. So, and roughly between them, they're managing about $2 billion of capital in their various funds. So we've definitely got the good and the great here. So, all right, let's get kicked off. So, 10 weeks ago, as I alluded to, there was a lot of confusion and terror out there. I remember personally feeling kind of, I think the day the crisis hit, I ran home and cancelled Netflix and Stan and Prime and everything else. I realized that the next week that was kind of stupid and I reinstated most of them. But I think there was a lot of terror going on, just from small things like that to bigger things as well. Not everyone's made it through to the other side, some unfortunately, but my perception, there was a huge dollops of cash that the government's thrown around. The dissipation of the health crisis, certainly locally, it's not gone, but it's certainly dissipated, and the lockdowns are easing. So, it's not we're back to normal, but there is a semblance of normality out there. So we're definitely in a better spot than we were back in March. So the question one, I do want to keep the same theme, but I'm going to ask each of you a sort of different sub-theme to that. And it's just a pulse check in the current status. So are we in a better spot than we were 10 weeks ago is the broad question. So Michelle, I might start with you and maybe ask you to give a bit of a nod towards probably the most important part of this, because it's the health crisis. The whole reason that we're doing this is to protect people from getting sick, protect people from dying. Do you want to give us an observation? Are we in a better spot than we were in March? And yeah, what's coming? So maybe with a slant towards that health crisis.
Yeah, look, I think Australia's absolutely come through this pretty well so far. You know, the government's used data science and they've had a model which was flattening the curve. And, you know, we managed to flatten the curve. And in fact, we're sort of on the recovery in some ways. I think what the government's now looking to do is to create a new model for how you avoid the second wave. And they don't actually know exactly what that looks like yet. But they're working on it and they're using data science to help support it. So, you know, go the innovation economy. On the health side, you know, there's some 400 trials globally for vaccines and therapies now. One of our own companies is in that fight. And, you know, one of our vaccine nanopatch companies also being called in to start discussions on pandemic response. So it's pretty interesting to see how the world is really coming together to try and solve this problem. We also saw like great local innovators supporting the pandemic, and we discovered companies like CleanSpace that nobody had heard of that were building respirators globally. Of our 22 portfolio companies, I think a lot of them didn't have to put in place their downside scenario plans. So, you know, that was pretty amazing. 5 have accelerated through this process and done better than they expected, you know, having great months or great outcomes. And I think this sort of goes to show the resilience of technology and healthcare companies. One, you know, lost material revenue and it's now recovering, which is really great. But from our perspective, I think as venture investors, our biggest concern is what's going on in the US. You know, we're seeing a lot of civil unrest, very worried about a second wave there because their economy is opening up really fast before they've, you know, got back in control. There's some major US corps that are severely impacted. So, you know, that's going to put a threat on potential future acquisitions. So while there's a lot of capital available in the venture world there, I think that it's starting to refocus on the post-COVID world. And we'll probably still see some sort of capital contraction down the track. So, you know, we're looking at the US and we're pretty worried about where our future companies are going in terms of exits and will there be a pivot to other geographies. But, you know, Australia, we've done pretty well. So, you know, I think our government's done a great job.
Okay, I think my internet connection was a little bit crappy during that, so apologies if there was some dropouts. Hopefully it's
much better now.
Much better. Yeah, I think it just didn't like it when I talk too much, so I should probably just ask pithy questions and move on. So, Rick, I might move to you. So thank you, Michelle. And you know, thinking about your portfolio, again, I think 10 weeks ago we were very focused on the portfolio and how to protect them and what they should be doing. How have they done? Any good or bad examples in terms of what you've seen out there from startups and their response? Rick, I think you're mute.
I've realised I'm on
Good
mute.
work.
Done the old Zoom trick. Well, hello everyone. Look, a lot has happened since since we last ran this panel, and I have to say, you know, it's been a more positive outcome generally, I think, than I think a lot of us thought back then. Generally, I'm feeling happy about where our portfolio is and the way that our companies have managed through it. For a few, we've had some really good positive growth coming out of this COVID period. You know, Canva, for example, has had just a phenomenal few months. They've released their Canva Pro Unlimited new product, which has just been this huge success. We've got Safety Culture, which has suddenly gone from having you know, mainly focused on people in sort of mining companies and out in the sort of out in the field, suddenly sort of every office worker now has to work safely. And so they've seen a huge swelling of their market and the applications that they're attacking. one of our newest companies, a little company called Overa. It's a company that makes a device that solves period pain in a drug-free way, has just had this awesome start to life, and has sold out 100% of its stock, both past and future, and built a really great community during this period. We've got companies like Gilmore Space that are just in their development phase and have just been heads down and just focusing on building. They're building a new rocket engine up in Queensland, and it's just been heads down, work hard. So they've been relatively unaffected. So I think for many companies, it's been a period of really being able to focus on their business. Look at get rid of anything extraneous. A number of our companies have had to make some layoffs. I've been overall very sort of proud in the way they've done that in a compassionate way. No one wants to let anyone go in this sort of period, but I think it's been done in the right way and for the right reasons. So we've had a few situations where that's had to happen, but overall I feel pretty comfortable that here in Australia we've, as Michelle said, we've come through it relatively unscathed, and I see a real opportunity coming out the other side. I think that's the exciting bit, is that there's this sort of community feeling that I think in Australia that we've done a good job. We've sort of got together, melded together, come through this together pretty well, and we've also done a lot of, we've sort of changed our lives in lots of ways, and hopefully a little bit open to, or more open to change and innovation in the near future. So pretty happy with where everything's at the moment.
Yeah, great. Yeah, there's some great examples in there, so it's really good to hear. On that theme, I mean, Craig, I might ask you about deal flow and what you're actually seeing. So I know AirTree, in fact, most of the VCs have all said that they're still open for business. How has your deal flow been? Any trends that you're seeing around that you'd want to call out?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Well, I mean, first I'd want to call out, I think one of the many kind of positives that come out of this crisis, and we said before, it's been 10 weeks since we've been chatting, is this wonderful community kind of sentiment and collaboration and that's come out of this. And I think the centerpiece of that has been you guys. So I think you guys have done a phenomenal job of pulling together. You got on the front foot and fired up these sessions, and I think it's been a fulcrum of a lot of the community conversations we've gone. So well done to all of you guys.
Thank you.
You are right. I mean, any VC will say they're open for business. I think it's important to look beneath the hood and say actually what's actually going on. I guess from the AirTree perspective, we're seeing the deal flow as strong as ever. I mean, companies that have been, either an idea phase or R&D phase, are still coming to us. We're seeing as many deals and investment opportunities as we ever did. We have done. We will do five or six new investments by June this year, which is kind of what we do. We sort of invest in 10 to 12 new companies a year, which is kind of the pattern that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years. But the same again and follow on around. So in terms of activity sets, I think it's been as active as we've ever seen. We, as you might know, we closed our last fund, a $275 million fund last year. So we just hired 2 new people into our investment team to help us invest that and deploy that and support founders. So that's all sort of BAU for us in terms of the investments. In terms of the trends that we're seeing, I think we are seeing sectors clearly firing off the back of this COVID crisis. I think the online learning development space is the adoption curves only got steeper. Health, telemedicine, diagnostics, companies in our portfolio with that sort of lens are doing really well. Robotics, actually, so it's the Australian Centre of Field Robotics continues to put out some phenomenal software and hardware, and is well recognised. There's a few really interesting companies that are there. And then I guess finally, cyber and design, cybersecurity. Who would have thought? But we have just a number of sort of hits coming out of Australia, which is spawned the sort of second order hits out of Threat Metrics and Bug Crowd and Codes. And so I think we've got Secure Code Warrior in our portfolio. So I think they're all sort of themes that we're seeing emerge from the sector, from Australia, where we can punch above our weight. And I think it's exciting. I would say there's a little word of caution. I think there's a big question mark about what the world looks like, and maybe you can do this in 6 to 12 months' time. There's a whole bunch of uncertainty around how we navigate the health crisis, what happens to the economy, A lot of VCs may struggle to raise funds this year and might pull back. So I think we probably should come back to this question in 3-6 months' time and see what it looks like. But right now, it's looking very positive.
Is that bid for the four of you to be back in the show again in a few months?
Well, let's see. Let's hope it keeps getting more and more positive.
Yeah, no, fingers crossed. Paul, I might jump to you. So, I mean, you've made a few announcements. I think there was something in the SMH and I suppose the Age about the government, what they've been doing, the JobKeeper, etc. So, I mean, do you want to touch on the effect of the government stimulus? Because I think it has been pretty material, and what you think it could have done better or has not done so. Just with a where are we now, and with a slant to the government and what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, we're 10 weeks into, or 10 weeks since we had the last, call in, as Craig mentioned, and absolutely, you guys have done an incredible job. And I think the whole sort of tech ecosystem in Australia has just been this sort of sense of community and incredibly supportive of each other. 10 weeks ago was a period of sort of peak uncertainty. Human beings, we are wired to hate uncertainty. Uncertainty is way worse than bad news generally, because you can deal with certainty. It's very, very hard to deal with uncertainty. It sort of creates a sort of a feeling of panic and inertia. And so obviously, 10 weeks in, there's still a lot of uncertainty, but relative to them, it feels like we kind of just have this, really much clearer perspective, which is great. Number one. Number two, again, things always feel good when they're better than we expect them to be. And so I don't think there's no doubt we're going to go through a little bit of a tough period economically. But if we, just focus on sort of governments for the moment, both federal and state, we do a lot of investing outside of Australia, obviously, as well as a lot of investing in Australia. We're talking to people all the time in different parts of the world. And the first thing everyone says to us when we're on a conversation is, "Oh, you guys have been amazing. Australia's incredible." People talk about New Zealand as well, which has been equally incredible. And so I think a country where we do like to criticise our political leaders, I think all of us should probably stop and reflect on: would we prefer to be living in the US right now? Would we prefer to be living in Brazil right now? Would we prefer to be living in a whole different parts of Europe right now? So on the whole, I think our political leaders have done an absolutely extraordinary job. Our Prime Minister, premiers, health officials, chief medical officers. It's been really, really amazing. I think we've seen a lot of the best of Australia. It's going to be a really tough period. We don't know what the health implications are for the next 12, 18, 24 months. How do we kind of both get the economy back on track and live with this virus? That's hard. And so there's going to be a lot of health and economic challenges going forward. Hopefully they are less severe than we thought they'd be. Hopefully they probably will be better than many other parts of the world, but that kind of doesn't help that much. It's a sort of an absolute thing rather than a relative thing. A lot of the people on this call, obviously, their customers all around the world, so we've all got a stake in what the economy looks like globally. Tech, as others have identified, has obviously been on the whole a winner. I mean, the story of the last 20, really the two stories of the last 25, 30 years globally have been the rise of the internet and the rise of China. And so what we've seen in the last 10 weeks has obviously been an acceleration of those trends towards the digitization of everything moving to the cloud, everything moving to the internet, et cetera. And so therefore, from the after effects for the tech ecosystem are not going to be as bad in all likelihood than previous crises. There will be, I agree with Michelle, there will be less capital coming in before post-crisis and pre-crisis, but it's not going to be as dramatic as previous crises. It's a little bit more business as usual, which is amazing news. In terms of what government needs to do and looking forward, I think generally speaking, the next 3 or 4 years is probably, and I won't go into the reasons, we can talk about it perhaps a little bit later, but we've been quite public in saying we think the next 3 or 4 years will be the best period for innovation globally since the golden era of 94 to 99, the dot-com era. I sort of cheat a bit when I say that 5 of the 10 largest companies in the world were founded in that period. I include Apple in that list with Steve Jobs returning in 97. But today 5 of the top 10 largest companies in the world, including Apple, were founded in that 5-year period. Thousands of other companies were founded in that era. And there's a range of reasons why we're really excited about the next few years from an innovation perspective. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah.
What's the role of government? We want Australia to be a winner. We're going to need to produce a record number of jobs. There is going to be higher unemployment than we've seen either since 91, 92, or maybe even going further back. So we are going to see unemployment tick up. We were struggling with productivity pre-crisis, as was all developed countries. Jobs and technology, whether they're software engineers, whether they're data scientists, whether they're product managers, are incredibly productive jobs. They're exactly the sort of jobs this country needs to produce. And so we as a country need to be pulling all levers to make sure that we move out of this crisis in a stronger position than we went in, and that we continue down the road of becoming a more innovative country. We're moving in the right direction, but not better.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Thanks, Paul. Rick, the last time round, I mean, I've referenced this a few times in subsequent events we've done. So you talked about the investment cycle, specifically around the post-crisis. So, whether it was the 2000 crisis or the 2008 financial crisis, the trough of the VC investment cycle was about a year after the end, however you class the end of the actual crisis. Are you still expecting that to be the case? And any tips? And I'll start with Rick, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, please do. But any further advice from startups who are out raising right now?
Yeah, so I think two things that are important in that thinking. One is that there is capital right now, and then I think by saying that the dip happens in a year, it means actually that the amount of investing is fairly active for the first usually 6 months to a year after a crisis, and then it begins to get a little more difficult. I would say that's still playing out. I think there has been good investment over the last couple of months. I know, everyone here has been investing, and I've certainly seen and heard of lots of rounds that have been completed. There is, I think, a movement towards more follow-on investing rather than new company investing in portfolios. And I think that's just natural, because we do tend to look to make sure our existing companies that we know well are well financed and can happily make it through this period. But there's still been some good first-time deals, new investments for VCs coming through too. So I think it's playing out fairly much as expected in the early days. Which brings me to sort of limited partners. In Australia, we have, I'd say, three main sort of categories of sources of investors into our funds. There's the Australian super funds, which are turning out to be probably the majority of the money. We have high net worths here in Australia, and then we have offshore investors. The super funds, I think, are particularly important to the health of this industry and to the startup industry in Australia going forward. And they've obviously been battered around a bit recently, and battered around for a number of reasons. One is, naturally, as listed markets go through an uncertain period, they look to their unlisted assets to check that they're valued properly. They obviously have suffered from the withdrawal legislation that came through, and a lot of uncertainty around that. I think we're starting to get some more certainty come through, and the withdrawals have been a lot lower than some of the forecasts, which is good. I think one of the things that's a little scary has been the bashing of the super funds for holding unlisted assets, and by a number of people, both in the government and by the press in particular. And I think this is, in some cases, absolutely unwarranted. Unlisted assets are an important part of a superannuation fund's suite of investments. And actually, it's a huge part of Australia's startup and innovation economy. If super funds become too scared to invest in unlisted assets, they become too scared to invest in venture capital, which is an unlisted asset. And therefore we see the tap that had just been turned a little bit on. It's like sort of, a half turn of the garden tap, as a group here on the screen and a number of others in Australia have managed to earn back the trust of the super funds. It's been this real I guess, sort of re-emergence of venture capital, and that has in turn allowed a re-emergence of the startup industry and the startup ecosystem, and some really great successes and great companies that are now employing thousands of people, and tens of thousands of people, in fact, have grown up. And if the super funds become too scared to invest in venture capital because they've been bashed too much by the press for owning unlisted assets, that is an issue, I think, that is quite serious.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll stop talking there, but that's my current sort of worry as we come into that year out phase.
Yeah,
is that the super funds are too nervous to invest in much venture capital, and therefore we run out of money mid-ish next year.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you didn't mention there, and I might chuck to the rest, because everyone on this panel has super money, and in some cases a lot of super money behind it. But the government announced that individuals can withdraw 10 grand per year from each fund. Now, when you're a fund like, for example, Host Plus, I mean, the average member balance is something like 30 or 40 grand, and the average age of the members is 30, I think, or thereabouts. And there was fear that there was going to be a bit of a liquidity issue if all of this money started getting pulled out. In theory, that could be a third of the fund being pulled out in cash terms. So any of the other three of you want to touch on that, and just, is that an issue?
I think, just adding to Rick's, look, I think, we were at a really, really important inflection point. I mean, we've publicly talked about we're out raising our fund at the moment. So it's been a really interesting period over the last 10 weeks, talking to both family offices and, excuse me, family offices and super funds. And so probably the conversations the last 10 weeks have sort of mirrored to some extent the sort of the mood that we've talked about, where the mood has got a lot better over the last 10 weeks. And that's really just looking backwards. I mean, looking forwards, it's much more complicated to make predictions. Markets have rebounded incredibly quickly. It probably in a way that's perhaps a little bit surprising, and we'll just see what the next few months pan out. But I would say two things. One is, I think this period, to Rick said, is critically important, because we've got a group of venture funds, some like Michelle's and Craig's and Rick's fund and our fund have been around for quite some time, and we've perhaps got slightly longer track record, and it's a little bit easier in terms of raising them. We've got funds that are emerging. We don't have a lot of venture capital in this country. Everyone keeps saying, oh, there's so much venture capital. Yeah, well, correct, compared to 10 years ago, when it was basically nothing. But we have very little venture capital in Australia relative to other countries. I'm not even comparing us to markets like the US and Israel, but on a per capita basis, we're still behind. We're still behind Singapore, we're behind the UK, we're behind Germany, et cetera, et cetera. So, it'd be great to see more funds. I think it's probably going to be a little bit easier for the more established funds. I'm probably a lot more optimistic about, I'm a lot more optimistic than I was 10 weeks ago about the reaction from both super funds and family offices, which is amazing. I think part of the reason for that is that, unlike previous crises, tech is perceived to be a winner, and savvy investors understand that and want to get behind that. But in aggregate, there will be less capital going to the sector, than there otherwise would have been because of the crisis. There are a group of investors where the super funds or family offices will say, oh, look, this is a bit hard at the moment because their own less related to what they think is happening in the tech sector, but perhaps more related to what might be happening in their world and desire for more liquidity, etc. I don't want to go into a long debate about the early release scheme. There was a lot of press about it, as there has been about other things. But I think the early signs are that the impact on super funds liquidity is frankly going to be way less than what people expected. That's really, really good news. I think there's a but in there. The but is the super fund, the superannuation system was introduced 30 years ago, give or take. Early 1990s. It has been the bedrock. It has been the bedrock of our sort of economic stability over the last 30 years. It is an incredibly important system. I think if you actually looked at the most important policies in Australia the last 30 years, I'd say one of them occurred way back in 91, 92 with the introduction of the super system, and the other one was this year with JobKeeper, which was frankly the best policy globally. It's got some things that don't work perfectly about it, but if you compare it to every other country in the world, it is a better designed system than any other country in the world was designed on the fly. And so those two things are critically important. And it's really important that our super system, superannuation system, comes out of this crisis the way it went in, which is a way in which Australians can prepare for their retirement, and ensuring that there isn't too much obligation on the public purse 20, 30, 40, 50 years out. We don't want to saddle our kids and our grandkids with debts in the way that they have been in other parts of the world.
Yeah. Okay. Let's maybe. Sorry, have you got? Was someone jump in there?
I was just going to add one final thing. I mean, I agree with all of that. I want to restate that of the importance of superannuation funds to the country, to the sector, and the sort of contagion risk we all face, I guess, and try to sort of keep this partnership going. I think the way we try and think about that is that there's not a lot we as VCs can do about the liquidity crisis, for example, or the run on the run on people pulling back their super early, or the rebalancing when the equity markets either overperform, underperform. That's sort of out of our hands. And to both Rick and Paul's point, that's probably gone down and up over the last 10 years. But I think there are a number of things we can do. I think we can perform. We can show results. We can show cash on cash outcomes. We can show unrealized outcomes. That's the most important thing. We can. At least I think we can help them think about programs rather than sort of backing a fund. I think we're sort of interested in back the sector, because, you know, super fund backing us is great, but if they back 3 or 4 other funds, it's better for them, it's better for the sector. We all win out of that. So I think a lot of work we can do around sort of educating them around programs. I mean, this is Rick's whole job. So, but I think there's some education we can do there. And I think the last thing is probably this partnership approach. It's not just money into the funds. They're looking to learn. They're looking to co-invest. They're looking to invest direct investments. That's good. That's a good thing for all of us. So I think that sort of partnership and sort of program approach can really help, I guess, the individuals within the funds navigate the world that they're trying to deal with. Yeah.
All right. In the interest of time, I might move on from that topic. A ton of questions coming in from the audience, so thank you. We've got a few celebrities out there. So Ed Husick, hi Ed, didn't know you were on, so nice to hear from you.
Ed.
Ed asks, what are the things the panelists could be done to help create a fertile ground for green shoots, is the way you put it. So I guess any policies or systems we could put in place to encourage new firms to succeed or emerge from this that maybe isn't being done just now. I guess, improving economic and community life post-COVID. So, Michelle, we haven't heard from you in a bit, so do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, look, I guess a few points. Just quickly on the superannuation side, I think there's a social responsibility for our large superannuation industry to be investing in the sector and creating the new jobs of the future. I think that's pretty important. And and it only is a very small amount of money. So they do invest quite a lot in the sector, but most of it goes overseas. So they're not necessarily facilitating local jobs. The R&D tax program is a great program that this government introduced, and it has been the lifeblood of the innovation ecosystem. And so, Ed, I would say, we should broaden how that system works for young companies. Because it really does help fund them as they're developing their businesses. And they feel that they sort of got a bit punished by how some large companies were using the R&D tax system, when really the little companies were the ones that were benefiting massively through that program. Obviously, making sure that our accelerators and innovators continue to develop, putting in place, possibly funds alongside universities so that innovative technologies coming out of there can actually get some early funding before they come out into the VC market, so they can, get that early traction and first customers or test their MVPs. Would also be, an opportunity in the ecosystem. So that'd be some of my tips, but I think just continuing to build on things like Innovation Bay does, where there's ongoing communication, ongoing support systems for young entrepreneurs, and facilitating where the technologies are coming from, because a lot of people are going to pivot. People lose jobs, they become creative, and they start to think about where their next opportunity is. You often get a wave of innovation that happens after a crisis. making available programs that support that. So maybe whether it's more grants into the innovation system or small loans for companies in the innovation system. I think all those things could be supported.
Okay.
I'm super excited to hear Ed in the room here, because I think, Ed, you and I had a dinner many moons ago, and this idea's been in my head. So I think the my short answer, I agree with Michelle, is on the lobbying and on the lobbying side and regulation side. The biggest thing, I think we've largely got the financial incentives pretty well done. There might be some tweaking. They've largely fixed, and the issues around ESOP, thanks to you guys, being fixed. I think immigration is a big one. The 70% of startups in the Valley are started by immigrants or children of immigrants. The data is very clear. Immigration is a clear driver of innovation, and at a time when the world's collapsing, this is a great time to open our doors. But I think the broader thing here, and you and I talked about this, is we've been quite good at lobbying sort of on point solutions, but as a sector, we tackled R&D tax incentives. We got the JobKeeper program extended to startups, but we're not great at creating a narrative, the story that resonates with the population, so that people like you can stand up in Parliament and talk about innovation without blushing. And I think that comes to somehow building a narrative around this sort of job creation, productivity, which doesn't really mean much to Tracy and Parramatta, but sort of getting excited about the jobs of the future, the whole industries that are being created, the new companies like ResMed and Cochlear, cyber, ag, sectors that are going to be created. I think we need, if we can find some way to tell a story, I think it might make your job easier when time comes to help.
Yeah, I was a bad host there, and I didn't explain who Ed Husick was for those that don't know. So Ed is a MP, is a Labour MP, and is very across the communications and technology portfolio. So a huge fan of the tech startups. I think, Ed, you were on the Innovation Bay podcast a couple of years ago. So anyway, good to have you on the show. Look, in the interest of time again, look, let's just try and take a few more topics. There's one in from Colette Grigich. I always get her surname wrong. Sorry, Colette, if I got it wrong. Do you think we're going to see more or less startups started in the next 12 months? This isn't so much, it doesn't seem about the quality, but volume. So, and maybe you want to touch on the quality as well. So, Rick?
Yeah, so I have to say most of our new company deal flow so far has been companies that were founded pre-COVID crisis. So last year, late last year, early this year. I've yet to see a lot come through that have been started actually in this crisis period. But I'm very hopeful. A whole lot of people, I think, have been kind of shocked by this event into thinking about what they really want to do in their life, thinking about the problems that really matter to them, and the problems that they can solve. And I'm really hopeful that over the next 6 to 12 months, and now we're just closed applications literally yesterday on our next StartMate Accelerator program, the next cohort. So we'll be going through all those applications in the next few days, and I'm really hopeful that we'll see a whole lot of very interesting startups from people who have gone through this period and decided they want to do something else, and they really are passionate about starting a business. So still to see.
Yeah. Anyone else on that one? Paula, do you think we're going to see more?
Yeah, I think, it's really early days, but I think if you take the point that Rick made, which I think is a really important point, it's been an amazing opportunity for people to think about all sorts of things in their lives and all sorts of things they want to do, and also, frankly, given that it's going to be a tougher time in the economy, I think people will be more open to starting their own businesses or joining startups. So that factor, and I think Rick spoke to it really well. I think the other factor is just about every sector of our society, there's going to be an opportunity to reimagine it in a way that we haven't been able to do for some time. And so let's talk about education as an example of that. But we've been talking about distance learning for 20 or 25 years. Most traditional institutions, most incumbent institutions, not just in this country but around the world, schools, universities, etc., have done very, very little in terms of embracing technology and thinking about new modes of teaching, new ways of communicating, curriculum. That's a separate topic, but it's a very, very conservative mindset globally within education. And so they sort of resisted change in terms of the incumbent players for 25 years. And literally in the space of a week, they had to change overnight. They had to go from essentially most institutions had to go from essentially a fully classroom model to a 100% distance model overnight. It's a remarkable change. The right answer wasn't what we were doing pre-crisis, but frankly, it's not what we're doing during the crisis. We're doing it during the crisis to kind of get by and to manage. And so education is one example of hundreds and hundreds of examples. Within education, there are obviously so many different subsectors. The opportunity for smart people to reimagine education and take the best of our traditional education systems and the best of utilising technology, thinking about the way in which students want to be educated, thinking about the best modes of delivery, thinking about the enormous cost of education and how do we both improve outcomes but put it on a more sustainable path? How do we reward our teachers better? Who I think every parent now recognises, if they didn't before, what extraordinary heroes teachers are in our community. And so I've picked education as an example. We could have picked 100 different examples. This is why the next period is going to be the most exciting era in a generation for innovation. There are so many important problems and opportunities that are going to need to be solved.
Yeah. There's an interesting question in from Peter Van Bruchem. Hey, Peter, all the way from Perth, so it must be early for you, so I'm glad you've woken up for this. We've been seeing a lot of use of Zoom. I think we all spend all day on Zoom, Slack, Atlassian. I mean, they're all these fantastic collaboration tools. Are you seeing VCs able and willing to invest in companies without actually having to meet them? And therefore, is this going to be the new normal? Are you going to see more deal flow from more disparate areas as a result of not having to sit down and have not necessarily having to sit down and have a coffee with someone? Who wants to talk about that? Craig?
Maybe I can just
say... Michelle, you jump in and then Craig.
Sorry. Maybe I'll just say, what we're hearing in the US. So at the moment, we're still meeting companies over Zoom. We're still progressing deals. We're still doing deals, actually. So we believe that we can use third parties to vet companies as well as ourselves, so we can reach out and get other touch points and get comfortable, particularly if they've been referred to us through known sources. In the US, we're getting mixed messages from VCs over there. Some are willing to do deals over Zoom and still invest capital. And others are saying we would absolutely require a face meeting at some stage before we would write a check, and particularly if it was a substantial check. So I think in smaller checks and smaller seed rounds, people are maybe more confident, but if they're writing a 10, 20, $50 million check, then they probably want to try and find a way of at some stage meeting face to face and looking at the whites of the eyes, so to speak.
Yeah, Craig?
We're certainly moving down the technology path for sure.
Yeah, Craig?
Yeah, we haven't made an investment where we haven't known the team yet, but we had done a vast majority of work on Zoom. I've had two conversations recently with some of our US co-investors, Bessemer and Microsoft. They've actually done investments Zoom, never meeting the team, and it's rethinking the way they think about sort of remote investments and travel. And I think there's a whole bunch of VCs in the US thinking about reducing their travel load. I think that, but I think that's slightly counteracted by US in general, outside the communications channel, just probably pulling back to the core. I don't know that they're going to be as interested as going out to remote countries, and that might be Australia for a while. I think this thing is going to pull back to still maybe Zoom communications, but somewhere in the US where they understand it. I think that might counteract the comms trend.
We approved a seed investment I think 3 weeks ago, still when we were all in full lockdown, where we'd only met the people digitally. We obviously had to do quite a bit of referencing, and when things did open up, we rushed out to actually meet them in person. But we got to the point where we were happy to make a seed investment, so a small investment, early stage, in a company that we'd only met digitally, obviously knowing that we needed to work harder at building that relationship.
And their office didn't turn out to be a PO box in some dodgy area of Sydney.
I think I don't want to add anything. I think Craig and Michelle and Rick sort of summarised perfectly in our views around seed. I think the one thing I'll add, which is I guess a sort of separate but related topic, is I live in Melbourne, Craig, Michelle and Rick live in Sydney. Most of the VC money in Australia is centred around Sydney and Melbourne in terms of where the folks are based. And so it provides a greater challenge now where there's restrictions on where we can fly in Australia. Most of the investing has been in Sydney and Melbourne-based companies. There's plenty of exceptions, but most of it has been in Sydney and Melbourne companies, disproportionately high. As a country, we need to do more to ensure that amazing founders, and we put up our hand and say we haven't done a good enough job. We need to do more as a country to ensure that amazing founders from all parts of the country get support, get capital. I mean, Rick's got an incredible example in his portfolio with Safety Culture, obviously, where they originated from council. We need to, and I'm sure others have as well, but we need to do a better job of it as a country and as VCs. Of ensuring that we find the very, very best entrepreneurs, doesn't matter where they live. And, the fact that we're kind of so prepared now to work on Zoom, I think just opens our eyes to, of course, you're going to meet people face to face where you can before you invest. It's a particular period now, but it just, I guess, calls out for us to need to be better around looking for the best opportunities wherever they are.
Yeah.
I think one thing that might come out of it is the early stages of getting to know sort of a founder and making that call of, yes, I'm interested in this. I think far easier now to happen over Zoom, which is great, right? Because it does mean we can get to that sort of initial, hey, I'm interested, I want to dig deeper into your company without having to go and have a coffee in Surrey Hills in Sydney, right, where we happen to be. And that's, I think, a really great thing that we can get through that first period.
Yeah, it's amazing how much sort of bullshit time there is that goes around even a quick meeting like that. So you can probably be twice as productive when you're just using Zoom rather than having to meet face to face. So I think that's a great point.
We've just got to find a better way to end calls rather than this.
Yeah, just do the hard close, just the ghosting. It's sort of related to that is a question from Jenny Van Dyke. We had a panel a couple of weeks ago here talking about seed and early stage. I mean, there was a seed and early stage funding gap emerging. I mean, we were seeing that, like we're in my Gelix hat last year, and even before that, there was a gap emerging. The VCs were getting bigger, investing bigger checks further down the track. I mean, what is that panel gave a pretty good answer around this, but as the more mature VCs, what's your observation on the seed and early stage funding landscape?
Hope mature was a reference to the age of the funds.
Yeah, of course. But you've got the conch pull, so why don't you take this one? What's your view on that?
Yeah, we're talking about mature. Look, it's it's really important we have as broad a top of funnel as possible. And I'm sort of, I'm talking about a sort of an eco health system health perspective, but from a kind of a fairness and equity perspective, it's really important that really great entrepreneurs right at the start of their journey have the opportunity to get funded and feel like there's a whole range of sources and funding sources out there. I think one of the risks of the crisis is we may have a little bit less funding sources than we otherwise might have, or we might have less funding with those funding sources. So that does make it a little bit trickier. I think we've seen some interesting policies, for example, out of the UK, out of Israel, addressing that question. I don't want to sort of be a conversation that's for government because the founders, the VCs, the accelerators, the incubators need to do the heavy lifting. Rick talked about StartMate. StartMate just continues to broaden its programs, both geographically and the types of programs, which is amazing. There are other great accelerators. But yeah, I think that would be something that we do need to be a little bit nervous about, which is ensuring, for the health of the ecosystem, from a fairness and equity perspective, that we really think hard, and I think all of us have obligations as well, really think hard about ensuring that we write as many early checks as possible. It's certainly been a change for us in the last 18 months, 24 months. I think probably 2/3 of the companies we've invested in the last couple of years have been pre-revenue, and that's been a bit of a change for us. But there is a large number of companies that need to get funding from as many sources as possibly can, and being creative about how we do that is extremely important.
Anyone else got a strong view in this, or should we take another question?
I think the reality is there's a whole bunch of structural headwinds driving that change beforehand as funds got larger, as you alluded to, Ian, as individuals basically invested their pot of angel capital and waiting for the returns. And I think some of the seed funds that we saw pre-active 4 or 5 years ago sort of put the money to work, and I think that's still there. I completely agree. It's something we need to solve for a whole host of equity and community and ecology sort of reasons. I think there are a few green shoots, and we're seeing more of the 6 investments we'll do this year. They're all at seed stage. Two have been bootstrapped. So you're seeing a few bootstrap companies. I know it's not always possible. I know that's always not a solution, but there are pretty good examples that are bootstrap companies getting to that point. And I think you're going to see some, the likes of these smaller funds, and you guys, Ian, and others are going to get some small, interesting seed funds off the ground, which can help plug that gap. I think that's good for all of us.
All right, let's, where are we? 8:52, so we get time for a few more questions. There's a few questions around the sort of post-COVID futures. Matt Backel, I think is the pronunciation. What big or incumbent or traditional industries do you see set ripe for disruption in a post-COVID era? So where should, someone in a boring corporate job that wants to launch a startup, what sector should they be looking at now?
Not many. I don't think there's many sectors that aren't ripe for disruption. That's a sort of a glib answer. And again, it's sometimes, some of this is sort of, so let's pick a few things that are really important. One is, I think, the category around the future of work, and as a sort of a more of a horizontal rather than a vertical play. And so actually reimagining what the future of work looks like. We're all talking about the fact that we love the flexibility of Zoom, but we also know the importance of face-to-face interaction. We understand the importance of collaboration, collisions that occur in a workplace that we're sort of missing by being on the end of a Zoom call, et cetera, et cetera. Things like Slack, I think, is a highly imperfect tool. I think there's a really, really great opportunity for us to sort of think about the future of work, the future of collaboration, communication. We've got some tools that have been very, very useful for us over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Supply chain, logistics, fulfillment, last mile is another area that I think is going to become increasingly important. That's really, really hard to get right. And there's lots of opportunities in that sector. We see a lot of interesting companies. The challenges, particularly in Australia, but obviously globally is a second example. I've talked about education. That's obvious. That is obvious, but important. But financial services is obviously one where we have a lot of talent in this country in financial services, and a huge number of opportunities. We're very, very good at it. They're very, very large markets. We're seeing both in businesses focused globally and businesses focused locally. You can build really, really big businesses. There are so many verticals and subsectors where there's opportunity to do better and create value. There are a few examples, but I think the world is there are going to be some very there's going to be some things around like last time around sort of a sharing economy and gig economy that sort of came out of GFC. They're going to look really, really obvious in 2 or 3 years' time. It's a job of the 4 of us and others to sort of identify some of those sectors sort of early in their journey.
All right, let's keep trucking along here. I'd maybe just add to that actually before we do move on. It's pretty hard if you're a founder or if you're not in a startup and you're thinking about what industry to disrupt. There's really only 1 or 2 that you can disrupt, because if you're not knowledgeable or passionate about the industry you're in, you're not going to create a great startup. So anyway, I think that's just a side point.
I think one of the other things, Ian, is just AI is going to become more prevalent, and one of the reasons why we've actually lacked productivity in the economies, my personal view, is because technology wasn't center of a business, it was tools used for business. And I think we're going to see the inversion of that, just like, possibly with education and with other sectors, but even, healthcare is totally open to disruption, triaging of patients, imaging, diagnostics. There's so many areas where AI is going to suddenly move into creating a lot more efficiency. And it's a $15 trillion prize by 2030. So if I was an entrepreneur, that's possibly a place I'd be taking a look at. How can we make all these things so much better and more efficient and create better services in the, for society?
Yeah. But I didn't quite catch it. I think I got the border. I think that's the key point here. I wouldn't solve for some large TAM. You find out something you love and you care about, and you're good at, and because you're going to be doing this for a long time. And anyone on this panel, the why you're doing this is one of the questions that we try and unpack. And if it's why because you read it in a corporate brochure, it's probably not a great reason. There's got to be some authentic connection between your DNA and the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. My audio seems to be a bit patchy here, so I think, given it's 8:57 and there's risk of my audio dropping out, I think we might call it there.
It's perfect at the moment.
Yeah. It is my home internet. It's just been a bit patchy, and there's some building work going on downstairs. I don't know whether they're sawing through the cable right now, but it's not ideal. Look, panel, thank you so much for that. Let me just jump back to the screen share. That was terrific insights once again. So really appreciate you spending the time with us. So let me see what we've got. Tomorrow, let's just talk about a couple of further events. In fact, not tomorrow, straight after this, we have our Discord session. So please jump in and join us. bit.ly.com/discordib. That's a bit of fun, and you'll meet some fun people who are part of the ecosystem. We've got a couple of one event tomorrow, so we do a weekly event with AWS. So we've got Tim Doyle from Eucalyptus. He'll be chatting to Rachel tomorrow at noon, so tune in there. And of course the networking that I just touched on. We are trying to increase the amount of early stage funding into Victorian startups. So we'll be launching a new angel club there with the support of LaunchVic. So thanks to them. This club is going to be for individuals passionate about investing in Victoria's most promising tech startups, of which there are a lot. So if you're interested in investing in startups with high growth potential, check out that link. I think Shan's going to put it in the chat. It's not on there, so that is going to be very interesting for us. There's a couple of two programs that we want to call out. Again, I think Shan will put the links in the chat. Accelerate 2020. The application is closing this weekend. Apparently, we've had some really good application summit coming in. So if you have a solution for SMBs coming out of COVID-19 or startup coming out of COVID-19 or trying to address some of those issues, please do apply. They'll pick up to 15 startups. It's going to be mentoring, masterclasses, and then you can present to the CBA investment or exec team for some investment. We also have Renewable Energy Showcase. So if you're in the renewable energy sector, please apply for that too. Finally, open the pod bay doors. We just did a new special that came out yesterday. So we do this every fortnight now. It's really good fun. We just talk about the week's or the fortnight's news focused on tech and Australia in particular. So it's always a bit of fun, and we cover a lot of topics. I think that is us. Oh no, I always have to thank the sponsors. Should never ever forget that because that is so important. So Macquarie Bank, KPMG, High Growth Ventures, AWS and Firemark. I can't thank them enough. So hopefully the audio is not as bad there. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks again to the panel. I've been your host, Ian Gardner. Innovation Bay is here to support you. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everybody.